My son texted me 2 weeks before Thanksgiving to tell me not to come. He did not call. He texted, which is its own kind of answer, because a man who is doing something he is ashamed of will always choose the method that lets him not hear the other person's voice. The text said, "Dad, this year is going to be really full. It's Vanessa's whole family coming in from 3 states, and the house can only hold so many. Since it's her side's turn, maybe you could sit this one out. We'll do something just us the week after. It'll be nicer that way anyway. Quieter. Her side's turn." As if Thanksgiving were a shift rotation. As if I were an inconvenient overlap on a schedule, instead of the man who taught him to carve a turkey, in that same house, at that same table, which I bought 40 years ago and gave to him and his wife 3 years back because they said they needed the room, and I did not. I read that text standing in my kitchen, alone, and I did not text back right away. I stood there in the quiet, an old widower in a house that had gone silent since my wife died, and I felt a specific cold settle into my chest, the cold of understanding that my only child had just told me, in the gentlest possible words, that I was not wanted at the table I built. I stood there with the phone in my hand, and I felt something I did not have a name for at first, and then I did, because I am an accountant and I name things precisely. What I felt was the feeling of being reclassified. My whole life I had been, on my son's ledger, an asset, a father, a resource of love and help and Sunday dinners. And in that text, gently, without either of us saying it, I was reclassified from an asset to a liability, from something you keep to something you manage, and I felt the reclassification happen in real time, and it was the coldest feeling I have ever had, colder than grief, because grief is love with nowhere to go, and this was the absence of love where love was supposed to be. And then I got in my car, and I drove to my lawyer's house, and before I went to bed that night, I had changed my will, completely, every line of it. My name is Frank Delaney. I am 72 years old, and I spent 41 years as an accountant, which means I spent 41 years learning to see the true story that numbers tell underneath the false story people tell about them. A balance sheet does not care how much you smile. It balances or it does not. And a man who spends his whole life reading the truth under the surface of numbers develops an eye that does not switch off just because the person lying to him is his own son. I want to tell you the whole story of what happened over the 6 weeks after that text, because it is the hardest and strangest thing that has ever happened to me. And because if you are old, and you have built something, and you have started to notice the people who are supposed to love you treating you like a problem to be scheduled around, then you need to hear how this went, and what I did, and why I did it. Because I did not do it out of spite, though it looked like spite, and the difference is the whole point. Let me tell you how I got here. Because the text did not come out of nowhere. It came at the end of 10 years of small, quiet steps, each one reasonable, each one explained as kindness, that had slowly moved me from the center of my family to a footnote in my son's calendar. My wife, Marie, died 4 years ago, 43 years married. And I will tell you honestly that half of what went wrong in the space she left. Because Marie was the one who saw people clearly, and when she was gone, I lost my instrument for reading the world. Marie could look at a person and know what they were, while I looked at the same person and saw only what they showed me. She warned me about Vanessa, the first year Daniel brought her home. She said, drying the dishes, "Frank, that girl is not marrying our son. She is acquiring a position, and she is going to spend her life climbing. And one day she is going to decide that we are either a rung on the ladder or a weight on it. And if she decides we are a weight, she will cut us loose, gently, and call it consideration." I told Marie she was being unkind. Marie was rarely unkind and almost never wrong, and every word of that turned out to be a prophecy. My son is named Daniel. He was a good boy, warm and easy and a little weak. The kind of boy who could not bear for anyone to be upset with him, and that softness, which Marie and I mistook for sweetness, grew into a man who could not say no to his wife, who would rather abandon his own father than endure his wife's displeasure. That is not an excuse for what he did, but it is the explanation, and understanding the explanation is the only way to actually fix a thing. Daniel married Vanessa 11 years ago, and I tried to like her, but Vanessa was, from the first day, a person who kept score, who experienced generosity as a debt she was owed, and any withholding as a theft, and who had, from the beginning, looked at Marie and me, and our paid-off house and our savings, the way an appraiser looks at a property, patient, calculating, waiting. When Marie died, the slow editing began. The first year they were kind, because grief makes people kind for a while. And then, gradually, the calls thinned. The invitations came later, and less often. I began to hear about family events after they happened, rather than before. The phrase, "we did not want to bother you," started appearing in conversations, always framed as consideration, always meaning exclusion. I was being edited out of my own family, one gentle omission at a time, and every single omission was explained as kindness, so that to object to any one of them would have made me the difficult one, the demanding old father who could not understand that his son had a busy life. Let me give you the specific bricks, because the pattern only becomes visible in the specifics. There was the year the calls went from twice a week to once a month, so gradually I could never point to the moment it changed. There was the birthday they took me to a restaurant instead of the house, and I did not understand until later that the restaurant was easier to leave, that they had begun choosing the venues of our contact for their exits. There was the school play I found out about from a photograph. After, and when I asked why no one had told me, Daniel said, "It was a weeknight, all the way across town. We did not want you driving at night. You know how you are." And I did not, in fact, know how I was about night driving, because I drove at night perfectly well. But there it was, a limitation invented for me and then cited as the reason for my exclusion. The construction of an incapacity I did not have in order to justify a distance they wanted. Each of these, alone, is nothing. That is the point. Any one of them, examined alone, is reasonable, even kind. It is only when you step back, the way an accountant steps back from books that balance line by line, but tell a false story in aggregate, that the wall becomes visible, and by then you are already on the outside of it. That is the trick of it, and I want you to understand it if you are old and this is happening to you. They do not push you out with cruelty. Cruelty you could fight. They push you out with consideration, with 100 small mercies, each of which is individually reasonable and which together add up to a locked door. We did not want to tire you. We thought you would be more comfortable at home. It is a lot of driving for you. Each one is a brick, and each brick is laid with a loving expression, and one day you look up and there is a wall, and you helped build it, because every time they laid a brick you said, "Of course, son, whatever is easiest." Whatever is easiest. I said it for 10 years, and every time I said it, I moved one seat further from the center of the table, until the text came, 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, and I discovered I had said, "Whatever is easiest," so many times that I had said myself right out of the house. Now I need to tell you about the money, because the money is the engine underneath all of it, and I did not fully understand that until later. I am not a rich man, but I am a comfortable one, in the way that a careful accountant who never lived above his means becomes comfortable over 41 years. There are the savings, the investments I managed conservatively my whole life, the pension, and there was a hole I would learn in my son's finances, a widening hole, because Daniel's career produced a lifestyle it could not support, because Vanessa wanted an extraordinary life, and Daniel earned an ordinary income, and the gap between those two things was the pit my son was always falling into. And what they were counting on, I came to understand, was the natural order of things, that I would age and decline and die, and everything would pass to Daniel, and the hole would be filled, and all they had to do was be patient and manage me gently in the meantime, keep me comfortable and quiet and out of the way, an aging asset, appreciating in a back bedroom of their attention until the day it matured. That is what I was to them. I did not know it in those words on the night of the text, but I felt the shape of it, standing in my cold kitchen, and something in me, some old accountant's refusal to let a false story stand when I could see the true one underneath, said, "No, not like this. If I am going to be treated as an estate instead of a father, then I will decide what happens to the estate, and I will decide it while I am alive and clear and in full possession of my faculties, and I will not do it out of spite. I will do it out of arithmetic, because the numbers of this family no longer balance, and I am the only one left who tells the truth about numbers." So I drove to my lawyer's house that night. His name is Harold Vance, 78, mostly retired, my lawyer and friend for 30 years, and he answered his door in his slippers and took one look at my face and said, "Frank, come in. This is not a social call." We sat at his kitchen table, and I told him about the text and about the 10 years before it, and he listened the way a good lawyer listens, and then he made me say what I wanted 3 times in 3 different ways. To be sure I meant it and was not just wounded. And what I wanted, I realized as I said it out loud, was not revenge. I want to be clear about that, because it is the thing that made everything work. I did not change my will to hurt Daniel. What I wanted was for the truth to finally be told in my family. One time, clearly, in a form that could not be charmed away or gently omitted. I wanted to stop lying, because that is what whatever is easiest is. It is a lie. Every time I said it, I was participating in the fiction that everything was fine, that I did not mind being edited out of my own family, and I was tired of lying. Marie never lied about anything, small or large, and I had spent 4 years slowly forgetting the thing she taught me, which is that a comfortable lie is more corrosive than an uncomfortable truth. Harold, being a good lawyer, told me how this ends if we were not careful. He said, "Frank, when you die, or maybe before, your son and his wife are going to say you were a grieving, isolated, declining old man, manipulated by resentment, not competent, and they are going to try to break this will. That is not a risk, that is a certainty. So we are not just going to make a will tonight. We are going to make one that cannot be broken. We are going to armor it." And that is what we did. Over the following days, at Harold's insistence, I saw 2 physicians who each certified in writing that I was of entirely sound mind, and both examinations were recorded. I recorded a statement, on camera, explaining in my own words exactly what I was doing and why. Harold had a second attorney review the whole will independently, to eliminate any claim of his influence. And I began to write down the pattern, the 10-year history of the editing, dates and events and quotes, a paper record of exactly how a father had been removed from his family, so that the story I would eventually tell could not be dismissed as an old man's failing memory, because it was not memory, it was a record, kept the way I keep all records. I am not going to tell you yet exactly what was in the new will, because the whole story turns on the moment my son found out, and I want you to find out when he did. And then I did the hardest thing, which was nothing. I told no one. I went on being the father who says whatever is easiest. I spent the Thanksgiving I was not invited to alone, with a small chicken and a good bottle of wine, and a long conversation with Marie's photograph. And it was, in some ways, a better Thanksgiving than the loud, crowded ones had become, because at least it was honest. At least no one at that table was pretending. That solitary Thanksgiving was both worse and better than you might imagine. Worse in the obvious way that a man who spent 43 years at a full loud table spent it at a table set for one, in a house built to hold a family. But better too, because for the first time in years I was not performing. At the loud, crowded Thanksgivings of the last decade, I had been performing gratitude I did not feel, performing that I did not notice the small exclusions, performing the contented patriarch while being slowly written out of my own family. And performance is exhausting. Alone with my chicken and my wine and Marie's photograph, I did not have to perform anything. I raised a glass to her, and I told her what I had done, that I had changed the will, that I had finally stopped saying whatever is easiest. And I felt, underneath the hurt, something I had not felt at a family table in a very long time, which was peace, the specific peace of a man who is no longer lying. But something happened on Thanksgiving Day that I did not learn about until later, and it changed everything. While Vanessa's family filled my son's house, my granddaughter Lily, who was 16, asked where I was. Lily is the one entirely good thing in this story. She was 16, and she was sharp, and she had spent her whole life around me, and when her mother said, lightly, "Oh, Grandpa preferred to stay home this year. It is a lot for him," Lily knew it was a lie, because she knew I had never once preferred to stay home. She did not say anything at the table. But 3 days later she drove to my house without telling anyone, and she knocked on my door, and she stood on my porch with a plate of leftovers and an expression I recognized, because it was Marie's expression, the expression of a person who has caught a lie and come to set it right. She said, "Grandpa, you did not prefer to stay home. Mom said you did. That is not true, is it?" It was not a question. And I looked at my granddaughter, who had driven across town because she could not stand a lie she had spotted at a table. And for the first time since Marie died, I did not say whatever is easiest. I said, "No, sweetheart, it is not true. Come in. I will make us coffee, and I will tell you the truth, because you are the only one in this family who came looking for it." And that afternoon, over coffee, I told my 16-year-old granddaughter the true story of what had been happening to her grandfather for 10 years, gently, without poisoning her against her parents, but honestly, because she had earned honesty by coming to find it. And I watched her recognize every bit of it, because of course, she had seen it too. She had just been told, the way children are told, that what she was seeing was not really happening. And at the end, she hugged me, and she said, "Grandpa, I am not going to let them turn you into a stranger. I do not care what they say. You are my grandfather, and I am going to keep coming, and they can explain to me why I should not." And she did keep coming. That is the thing that got me through the 6 weeks. Every few days, Lily drove over, and she became the one true thread connecting me to a family that had otherwise quietly written me off. And she did it in defiance of her parents, who I later learned were furious about it, because Lily's visits were a problem for the story they were telling themselves, the story in which they were good, patient children, and I was a difficult old man best managed at a distance. A 16-year-old with a plate of leftovers was quietly disproving that story, and they could not stand it. Through Lily, without her knowing she was showing me anything, I learned how bad things had become in my son's house. She mentioned one visit that her parents were fighting about money, a lot, in the low tense way parents fight when they think the children are asleep. She mentioned a man in a suit who came to the house and was not friendly, after whom there was a terrible argument. She mentioned that her tuition was late. And she mentioned, most troubling of all, that her mother had started talking at dinner about how expensive it was to care for aging relatives, about how some families put grandparents in homes not out of cruelty, but out of practicality, about how it was really the responsible thing, gazing at nothing as she said it, planting seeds in the family soil. I sat and listened to my granddaughter innocently describe the tightening noose, and my old accountant's eye assembled the numbers underneath. My son and his wife were drowning, in serious escalating trouble, and they had begun to float the idea of putting me in a home, which would accomplish 2 things at once. It would remove the inconvenient father from the story, and it would give them a mechanism to take control of my affairs, my house, my savings, all of it, as loving children managing a father no longer able to manage himself. They were building the case for my incapacity, the way you build any case, with small, consistent bricks, and the Thanksgiving text had been one of the bricks. And they did not know that the inconvenient father was a retired accountant who had already, on the very night of that text, driven to his lawyer and changed everything, and armored it, and was now sitting quietly, being written off, watching them build their case, and assembling the counter-case, one brick at a time, and waiting for the right moment to turn the whole thing over. The right moment came at Christmas. They did invite me to Christmas, and I understood exactly why the moment the invitation came. Thanksgiving I was surplus. Christmas I was a prop. Because Christmas was the family occasion where the narrative needed maintaining, where the relatives who might one day be asked to support the story of my decline would be present, and where a warm, careful, performed inclusion of the aging father would serve the plan better than exclusion. I was to be exhibited, and exhibited carefully, so that the exhibition would also, subtly, display my supposed decline. A comment here about my forgetting things, a gentle correction there of something I had not gotten wrong. I knew all of this walking in, and I had decided that Christmas was where I would tell the truth. Not with a scene. Marie never made a scene in her life. She simply told the truth plainly at the moment it needed telling, and let it do its own work. So I went to Christmas dinner at the house I built, and I sat at the table I made, surrounded by Vanessa's relatives, and my son, and his wife, and Lily, who caught my eye across the table and gave me a small private nod, and I waited, and I ate, and I let them perform their patient goodness. The dinner before I stood up was its own theater, and I sat through it watching the performance the way you watch a play whose ending you already know. Vanessa was at her most dangerous, warm and gracious and attentive, refilling my water glass, asking after my health, in a voice pitched for her relatives to overhear, "Frank, are you warm enough? He feels the cold so much these days," constructing, sentence by sentence, in front of witnesses, the frail declining father she needed me to be. Every kindness was a brick, the blanket she offered that I did not need, the little laugh when I mentioned something from the past, oh, Frank and his memories, as though remembering were a symptom rather than a pleasure. It was masterful, and if I had not understood exactly what she was doing, I might have believed it myself, might have started to wonder if I really was slipping, because that is the insidious thing about being narrated as frail. It makes you doubt your own steadiness. And Daniel sat beside her and let her do it, and worse, joined in, gently. "Dad, you do not have to remember all that. Do not tire yourself." And I watched my son participate in the construction of my decline, at the table I built, and I felt the last of my hesitation leave me. Vanessa did her small comments. "Frank, do you remember where you put the thing? You have been so forgetful lately." And I said mildly, "I remember everything, Vanessa. That is rather the problem." And I watched her not quite know what to do with that. And after dinner, when the plates were cleared, and the relatives were settled with coffee, and my son stood up to make the little toast he made every year, I stood up too, before he could start, and I said, in the mild, clear voice of a man who has spent 41 years telling people the truth about numbers, "Before you toast, Daniel, I have something to say to the family, and I would like to say it while everyone is here, because it concerns everyone, and I think it is better said in the open than in the gentle private way this family has gotten used to." And the room went quiet, and my son sat down slowly, and I told the truth. I did not rage, I did not accuse. I narrated, calmly, in front of Vanessa's parents, and her sister, and all the assembled relatives who had been recruited into the story of my decline, the actual sequence of events. I said I had not preferred to stay home for Thanksgiving, that I had been asked not to come. I said I had spent 10 years being gently, lovingly edited out of my own family, one considerate omission at a time. I named the pattern, calmly, brick by brick, the thinning calls, the events I heard about afterward, the "we did not want to bother you." And I watched the faces of Vanessa's relatives change as they heard, for the first time, the other side of the ledger. The side that did not match the story of the patient children and the difficult old man they had been fed for years. And here is the thing I noticed as I spoke, the thing that told me it was working. The relatives, Vanessa's people, who had come expecting a pleasant holiday with their gracious hosts and their sweet declining grandfather, went very quiet, and then they began, one by one, to look not at me but at Vanessa and Daniel, and I watched the story they had been told for years come apart in real time on their faces, because they were hearing the other side of the ledger, and the calm, precise old man laying out dates and quotes did not sound like a confused, declining burden. He sounded like exactly what he was, an accountant reading a true account. That is the power of the calm. If I had raged, they would have seen a bitter old man and felt sorry for the children who had to manage him. Because I was calm, they saw a competent man telling a documented truth, and there is no defense against that, because the whole strategy of the gentle exclusion depends on the excluded one never getting a calm, clear hearing in front of witnesses. And here I was, getting exactly that. And then I said the thing that stopped the room. I said, I am telling you this not to shame anyone, but because I have made a decision, and you have the right to hear the reason before you hear the decision. On the night I was uninvited from Thanksgiving, I went to my lawyer, and I changed my will. My old will left everything to my son. My new will does not. You could hear the house settle in the silence. I saw Vanessa go very still, all the calculations suddenly visible on her face, the performance dropping away. I saw my son's face do something I had not seen since he was a boy, caught in a lie. And I saw Lily lean forward, because even she did not know this part. I said, I have left a real and meaningful portion, in a trust controlled by my lawyer until she is 25, to my granddaughter Lily, for her education and her future, where not $1 of it can be reached by anyone but her. I have left another portion to the community college, for a scholarship in Marie's name. And I have left to my son a specific and deliberate sum, not nothing. I did not disinherit my child, but a modest fraction of what he was counting on, given with a letter explaining that it was given in love, but with open eyes, and that the rest went where it could not be wasted or taken. I want to be clear why, I said, because Vanessa is about to call this cruelty, and it is the opposite. I did not divide my estate to reward and punish. I divided it according to a single principle I have lived by for 41 years, that money should go where it will do what it is supposed to do, and not where it will be wasted or weaponized. Money left to Daniel would not be an inheritance. It would be a transfusion into a hemorrhage, gone in 3 years, and it would teach my son, one final time, the lesson his whole life has taught him, that someone will always cover the gap between his story and his reality. I love him too much to teach him that again with my last act. I have spent a life watching money reveal what people truly are, and I have watched, these last 10 years, what my family became, and I will not pretend otherwise now. The room did not stay quiet after that. Vanessa broke first, and when she broke, the performance came off entirely, and her relatives got to see, for the first time, the woman underneath the patient daughter-in-law. She stood up, and her voice was flat and fast and vicious, and she said I was a bitter old man punishing my family, that I had clearly lost my judgment, that this was exactly the kind of confused, vindictive decision that proved I was no longer competent to manage my own affairs, and that they would contest it, that a will made by a declining old man out of spite would never hold. And I let her finish, and then I said, quietly, the thing I had been saving. I said, Vanessa, I anticipated you would say that. So the same night I changed the will, I was examined by 2 physicians, independently, who each certified in writing my full mental competence. The examinations were recorded. I recorded a statement explaining my reasons and my full understanding. And I have kept, for 10 years, a written record. Dates, times, what was said, the thinning coals, the Thanksgiving text, the comment you made at this table an hour ago about my forgetting things, which I wrote down before dinner was over. I am an accountant, Vanessa. I keep books. I have kept the books on this family for 10 years, and they balance, and they tell a very clear story, and it is not the story of a confused old man. It is the story of a family that decided its father was an asset to be managed, and one member of that family who decided, while he still had every faculty intact and documented, to tell the truth about it. The silence after that was the loudest thing I have ever heard. And into that silence, Lily stood up. 16 years old, at a table full of adults, and she stood up, and she said, in a voice that shook but did not stop, "I want to say something too. Grandpa is telling the truth. I have watched it happen. Every time I said, we should invite Grandpa, or visit Grandpa, I was told he was tired. He was a lot. He preferred to be alone. I believed it, because I was a kid and you are my parents, but then I went to see him, and he was not tired, and he did not prefer to be alone. He was just alone, because you made him alone, and you told me it was his choice. You lied to me about my own grandfather for years, and I am done being lied to." And she walked around the table, past her stunned parents, and she stood next to me, and she took my hand. I nearly came apart at that. A man can withstand a great deal, but a 16-year-old crossing a room to stand beside him, in front of the whole family, is a different order of thing. I held her hand, and in that moment I understood that whatever else happened, whatever the will did or did not do, whatever became of the money, I had already won the only thing that mattered, which was that the truth had been told, out loud, at the table, and my granddaughter had heard it, and believed it, and chosen it, and no amount of gentle lying would ever put her back in the fog again. The dinner ended badly, as you would expect. Vanessa's relatives left quickly and uncomfortably, having seen far more of their hosts than they came to see. My son sat with his head in his hands and did not speak. Vanessa made several more threats about lawyers and competency hearings, and I let them wash over me. And Lily asked if she could come home with me that night, and my son did not object, could not object, and so my granddaughter packed a bag and came to stay at my house, and for the first time in 4 years, since Marie died, that house had life in it again. I want to tell you what happened after, because the dinner is the middle, not the end, and the after is where the meaning lives. Vanessa tried to contest the will. Her lawyer, after reviewing what Harold sent over, the 2 competency examinations, the recordings, the 10 years of documentation, my 41-year career as an accountant, which made the argument that I did not understand money, faintly ridiculous, told her what a competent lawyer tells a client in that position, that she had no case, that a will this thoroughly documented could not be broken, and that pursuing it would cost money. She did not have to lose a fight she could not win. And Vanessa did the arithmetic, and dropped it. Not out of grace, out of math, the only language in the end that reached her. My son I did not hear from for 2 months. Not a card, not a call. And I understood the silence, because I had learned to read him, and it told me that he was not wrestling with remorse. A son who felt real remorse would have called, would have begged, would have wept on the phone. A son who felt only that the harvest had failed would go quiet, would regroup. My son went quiet, and for a long time I believed there was nothing left in him but the calculation, and I made my peace with that too, because Marie's memory had prepared me for it, had told me I might have to grieve him like a death and survive it, and I was surviving it, one slow day at a time, in a house that my own honesty had finally made mine again. He was grieving the money, the inheritance that was going to fill the hole, and he did not yet have it in him to grieve the father. And until he could tell the difference between those 2 griefs, there was nothing for us to say. Lily more or less moved in for that winter and spring, and it was the happiest I had been since Marie died. She did her homework at Marie's old desk. She learned to cook Marie's recipes from the cards Marie left, the 2 of us in the kitchen ruining things and laughing about it. And her parents, in the collapse of their scheme and the shame of that Christmas dinner, did not have the standing to fight it. I taught her things too, real things, the things I would have taught her over years if her parents had not kept us apart. I taught her how to read a financial statement, and she took to it, and one evening she looked up from a company's books I had brought home as a lesson, and she said, "Grandpa, this company is lying. Look, they keep explaining this one number, and she had found it. At 16, the over-explained transaction, the tell, and I sat back and I thought, there it is, her grandmother's eye. It survived. It skipped a generation past the son it could not save, and landed in the granddaughter, whole. We made up for lost time. Vanessa and Daniel divorced within the year because a marriage built on a scheme does not survive the failure of the scheme. And in the spring, Daniel came to my house, alone. He stood on the porch the way Lily had months before, uncertain whether he was allowed in, and the softness in his face had worn down to something else. And when he finally spoke, it was just my son, worn down to something real at last. He had lost weight. The good clothes were gone, replaced by ordinary ones, and I understood without being told that the household was in freefall now, that the scheme having failed, there was nothing holding up the appearance anymore, and that my son was, for perhaps the first time in his adult life, exactly as he appeared, with no story papering over the gap. He said, "Dad, I do not want anything. I need to say that first, because I know it is the only thing that would make you listen. I am not here about the will. The will is fair. It is probably more than I deserve. I am here because Lily will barely speak to me. And when she does, she talks about how you told the truth at that table. And I have been thinking about the fact that my 16-year-old daughter had to teach me what honesty looks like by watching her grandfather. And I have been thinking about that text I sent. And I cannot stop hearing myself tell my own father to sit Thanksgiving out, in the house he built. And I do not know how I became a person who could do that, but I did. And Mom would be ashamed of me. And I am ashamed of me. And I do not expect you to forgive it. I just needed to say it to your face, once, without wanting anything. I looked at my son for a long time, and I thought about Marie and about what she would have done, and I knew, because Marie believed in the truth, but she also believed in the door, believed that a person who tells the truth and then comes back with empty hands should be let in, not for the money, never for the money, but for the door. So I let him in. Not the inheritance. That was done. That was fair. That stood. But the door. I made coffee, and we sat at the table I built, and we began, slowly, clumsily, at 72 and 46, the work of becoming honest with each other, which is the only work that had ever mattered, and the only work our family had never done. It is not fixed. My son and I are not healed, we are healing, which is a different and slower thing. But Daniel comes on Sundays now, sometimes with Lily, and we are learning, at an age when most men have stopped learning anything, to tell each other the truth about small things, which Marie always said was the only way to keep from lying about large ones. And Lily is thriving, going to college in the fall, on the money I set aside where no one could reach it. And she is going to study accounting, because she says she likes the idea of a profession where you tell the truth about numbers, and the truth is the whole job. Marie would have loved that. Marie would have loved her. So here is what I want to say to you. If you have listened this far, and if any of this sounds like your own family, if you have started to notice the thinning calls, the events you hear about afterward, the gentle omissions each explained as kindness, hear an old accountant who nearly missed it. They do not push you out with cruelty, they push you out with consideration, and every brick in the wall is laid with a loving expression, and the most dangerous words in the world are whatever is easiest, because every time you say them, you help build the wall that shuts you out. Stop saying whatever is easiest. Tell the truth, plainly, at the moment it needs telling, the way you would tell the truth about a number that did not add up. Keep your affairs your own. Document your own competence while no one can dispute it. And if you have to change everything, then change everything. Not out of spite, never out of spite, but out of arithmetic, because the numbers of a dishonest family do not balance, and you may be the only one left who is willing to say so. I was uninvited from a table I built, and in the space that opened up when they pushed me out, I found the last honest thing I had left to do, and I did it, and it cost me the comfortable lie I had been living, and it bought me a granddaughter who stood up at a table and took my hand, and a son who is learning, too late but not too late, what it means to come to his father wanting nothing. Marie used to say that a comfortable lie is more expensive than an uncomfortable truth. You just pay for it later, and slower, and with interest. I paid for 10 years of comfortable lies all at once, at a Christmas table, in front of the whole family, and it was the best money I ever spent. She was almost never wrong about people, and she never once stopped believing our son had a real man in him somewhere, under the softness. Lily cut a dovetail last Sunday, in my workshop, clean and true, and Daniel watched her do it, and I watched him watch her, and I thought about how close I came to losing all of it, the granddaughter, the son, the whole family, to a wall built one considerate brick at a time, and how the thing that saved us was not the money and not the will, it was the truth, told once, oh plainly, at a table, and a 16-year-old brave enough to cross a room. Neither did I, and it turned out we were right.